You'll have to speak proper English if you want to be taken seriously in my courtroom," Judge Harold Bexley snapped, glaring over his spectacles at the young black man standing before him. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. The bailiff shifted on his feet. The clerk hesitated, fingers hovering above the keyboard. Malik Carter stood still, his brown skin radiant under the harsh fluorescence. His shoulders relaxed, but his eyes were hard. He had been calm up until that moment. Calm when the court staff had triple-checked his credentials. Calm when the opposing counsel had smirked at his dreadlocks. Calm even when security had asked if he was the defendant. But this was something else. "Excuse me, Your Honor," Malik asked, voice clear, deliberate, and without a hint of aggression. "You heard me," Judge Bexley said, leaning forward. "This is a court of law, not a street corner. If you want your argument heard, speak proper English." The courtroom gasped, as if a collective slap had been delivered through the air. Malik's jaw tensed. His client, a middle-aged woman named Dolores Jenkins, placed a hand gently on his arm. "Don't," she whispered. "It's not worth it." But it was. It always was. Malik reached slowly into his briefcase, removed a neatly folded sheet of paper, and stepped forward. "I believe this speaks for itself," he said. Judge Bexley looked irritated. "What's this now?" "My law degree," Malik said, holding it out. "From Yale." The courtroom froze. Even the court reporter stopped typing. There it was, Malik's full name, his credentials. The gold seal of Yale Law School gleaming under the courtroom lights. "I'm bar certified in 2 states," Malik added, "and fluent in 3 languages, including the English that you presume I don't speak properly. The dialect I use reflects my culture, not my competence." The judge's mouth tightened. "You may sit down," he muttered, waving Malik off like a fly. But Malik didn't sit. Respectfully, "Your Honor, I won't. Because this isn't just about me. It's about every black man who's ever walked into a room and been assumed to be less. Every woman like Miss Jenkins who's had to fight for dignity in a system designed to silence her." Gasps echoed again. Some of the jurors looked down. The opposing counsel shifted awkwardly in his seat. "I prepared this case within the bounds of the law," Malik continued. "I've spent years mastering jurisprudence, defending the vulnerable, and advocating with precision. But none of that mattered the second you heard how I speak. You reduced me to a stereotype in less than 10 seconds. Judge Bexley leaned back, suddenly quiet. "You have my apologies, Mr. Carter," he said stiffly. Malik stared at him, unblinking. "Apologies don't erase prejudice. They're just the beginning." Malik hadn't always been this composed. There was a time, not too long ago, when words like that would have broken him. His story began far from courtrooms and polished arguments, in a cramped apartment in Southside Chicago, where sirens were lullabies and ambition was a quiet, fragile thing. His mother, Janice Carter, was a nurse who worked double shifts and taught him the value of words, especially the ones others thought he wasn't supposed to know. She made him read aloud every night. Baldwin, Angelou, Coates. His father, gone before he turned 5, had left nothing but a single book on the shelf, The Souls of Black Folk. It wasn't until 7th grade that Malik realized people heard him differently. "Why you talk like that?" his classmate Marcus had asked. "Like what? Like smart and stuff? You trying to be white?" That day, Malik went home and asked his mother, "Is talking smart a white thing?" She knelt down beside him and said, "No, baby, talking smart is a you thing." He never forgot that. Years later, when he got into Yale, he was one of 6 black students in his cohort. Professors called him articulate with a tone of surprise. Some classmates avoided him. Others mocked his hair, his slang, his Chicago cadence. But he knew who he was. And every time someone underestimated him, it lit a fire. At graduation, he'd been voted most likely to make the Supreme Court rethink itself. He chose public defense because that's where he felt most needed. That's how he met Dolores Jenkins, A grandmother accused of shoplifting baby formula. She ain't do it, Malik told the investigator. And I'm gonna prove it. She ain't do it. The investigator mocked. Is that legal speak? Malik smiled. It will be. Back in court, Judge Bexley reluctantly allowed Malik to continue. He made his arguments flawlessly, citing precedent, detailing surveillance inconsistencies, even pointing out the store clerk's shaky testimony. Your Honor, Malik said in closing, this isn't just about formula. It's about how quickly we criminalize poverty, how easily we judge without seeing. Dolores wiped tears from her eyes. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. Not guilty. When the verdict was read, Dolores hugged Malik so tightly he couldn't breathe. The opposing counsel didn't meet his eye. Judge Bexley cleared his throat. Mr. Carter, he said, you argued passionately and effectively. Malik nodded once. Thank you, Your Honor. He packed up his briefcase, law degree back inside, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Later that week, the moment went viral. Someone had filmed it, the confrontation, the clapback, the degree, #SpeakProper. English trended for days. The clip was everywhere. News anchors debated it. Columnists wrote think pieces, but Malik didn't care for the attention. He was back in court the next day, defending a teenager arrested for skipping a subway fare. They said he mouthed off to ACOP. The mother sobbed. He just talks like us. Malik smiled. Then he's in good hands. The subway fare evasion case wasn't flashy. No media cameras, no crowd waiting for justice. Just a tired mother. A 16-year-old boy named Jamal with fear in his eyes. And Malik, still in his worn-out suit. Still carrying the same briefcase that once held a law degree, powerful enough to silence a judge. He ain't mean no harm, the mother explained, her voice shaking. I gave him the fare card, but it had expired. I didn't know. The officer didn't even give him a chance to explain. Jamal sat with his head down, his hoodie pulled low. Malik crouched beside him. Jamal, he said softly, look at me. The boy lifted his eyes. You got any record? No, sir. Then we fix this. But you gotta trust me. Jamal nodded, almost too afraid to hope. In the courtroom the next morning, the same dynamics played out. The prosecutor, a young white woman with a clipped tone and perfect posture, pushed for community service and a permanent mark on Jamal's juvenile record. He resisted arrest. She argued. No, Malik said. He hesitated. That's not the same thing. The judge looked over his glasses. Mr. Carter, are you suggesting the officer exaggerated? I'm suggesting Jamal was afraid. Wouldn't you be? Your Honor. If your skin made you a suspect before you even opened your mouth. The courtroom held its breath again. Motion to dismiss, Malik said firmly. The judge glanced at the file. Then at Jamal, so small in the defendant's chair, his knuckles white with tension. Motion granted. The mother broke down sobbing. Jamal's lips trembled, unsure if he should smile. Malik simply nodded and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. You're free to go, son. Stay out of trouble. Jamal nodded quickly, clinging to his mother as they left the courtroom. She turned before exiting and whispered, Thank you. God bless you. The more cases Malik won, the more he became a target. Not by the media. They were fascinated by him, but by the system. Court officers randomly checked his ID. Judges interrupted him more than they did others. Colleagues whispered behind his back, You're too loud. You're too proud. You're too you. But Malik knew the game, knew how centuries of white supremacy had trained America to distrust confidence when it came in black skin, knew that every proper English jab was a dog whistle for assimilation. Still, there were days when it hurt. One night, after a brutal loss in a case involving a wrongly accused teen shot by police, Malik found himself back at his tiny office, lights off, staring out the window. Rain tapped against the glass like the voices in his head. Why are you even doing this? One of them whispered. He buried his face in his hands. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost didn't pick up. Hello, Mr. Carter, a deep voice said. This is Judge Bexley. Malik sat up. Yes. There was a pause. I watched that video again. The one from your first case in my courtroom. Malik said nothing. I was wrong, the judge admitted. Dead wrong. And I'd like to speak with you in chambers. Privately. Tomorrow. Malik narrowed his eyes. Why? Because I want to understand what I never even tried to. The next day, Malik stood in Judge Bexley's chambers, arms crossed, unsure of the trap. I grew up in Tennessee, Bexley said, pacing slowly. Segregated schools. My father told me black folks should keep to their own. I never questioned it. That's a choice. Malik said flatly. I know. That's why I'm here. I've been a judge for 22 years, and I realize now that I've done more harm than I care to admit. Malik blinked. That level of honesty from a white man with power. Rare. Suspiciously rare. I've seen kids come through here who never had a chance, Bexley said, eyes distant, and I punished them anyway, because their English sounded off, or they sagged their pants, or they looked at me wrong. But you showed me that I judged your entire humanity in a single sentence. More like a single sound, Malik corrected. Bexley nodded slowly. I'm retiring next month, he added, and I want to use my remaining time to change what I can. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just guidance. Malik stared at him. Then he reached into his bag, not for his law degree this time, but a small card. You want guidance, he said. Come volunteer at the Youth Justice Center every Saturday. No robe, just you and the kids. Bexley took the card in silence. News of Malik's boldness spread. Law students began attending his hearings just to watch him work. Black kids who once hated the system now dreamed of becoming lawyers because of him. One day, a sixth grader from his old neighborhood sent him a letter. Dear Mr. Carter, my teacher said I should write to someone who inspires me. I picked you. I saw the video where you told the judge off. My cousin said that was the realest thing he ever saw. Now I want to talk smart like you. Not white, just smart. Love. Trayvon. Malik kept that letter in his briefcase, right next to his law degree. One case brought everything full circle. A young attorney fresh out of law school, white, well-meaning, clumsy, came to shadow Malik. Her name was Emily. I admire you so much, she gushed. I want to learn from the best. Malik was polite but wary. He'd been burned before by allies who disappeared when things got uncomfortable. They were defending a young woman, Nia, accused of resisting arrest after asking an officer why she was being searched outside her own apartment complex. She was mouthy. The officer testified. Is that a crime? Malik asked. She had an attitude. Still not a crime. In the hallway, Emily whispered. You were incredible in there. Malik didn't smile. You'd be surprised how often incredible doesn't win. But this time it did. Nia walked free. And outside the courtroom, she threw her arms around Malik. You didn't just defend me, she said. You believed me. Malik smiled finally. That's the job. Emily stayed on as an intern, then a partner, then a friend. She listened, she learned, she unlearned. And one day, she surprised him. You know what's funny, she said, as they left court one evening. I caught myself about to correct a kid's grammar today. Then I stopped. Malik raised an eyebrow. Because I realized, language isn't about sounding white. It's about being heard. Malik nodded slowly. Now you're talking. The story doesn't end with fame or fortune. Malik never ran for office, never made millions. But he did something bigger. He changed the room. Not just the courtroom, every room he walked into. He carried his roots in every sentence, his struggle in every motion filed, his ancestors in every closing argument. So the next time someone said, speak proper English, there was always someone behind them saying, he already is. Months passed, and Malik's presence in the courthouse became legendary, not just for his intellect, but for the way he held space, for the way he never backed down, even when the odds were stacked sky high. But behind every win, there were nights of doubt, exhaustion, and a heart stretched too thin. One of those nights found him back at his office, long after the city had gone to sleep. The window rattled from the winter wind. The only light came from a desk lamp illuminating stacks of folders, most of them marked pro bono. He was halfway through reading the case of a wrongfully evicted single mother when a knock came. He looked up. "It's open." The door creaked, and in walked a tall man in a dark blue uniform, Police Captain Ray Morris. Malik immediately tensed. "We closed," he said sharply. "I know. I'm not here on official business," the captain replied. Removing his hat, "I just wanted to talk about the Johnson case." Malik leaned back. "The one where your officer lied under oath," Morris exhaled. "That one." Malik studied him. "What do you want?" "Captain, I've been a cop for 27 years, Morris said, "and I've seen a lot. But that day in court, when you tore that officer's testimony apart, it shook me. Not because you were right, but because you didn't flinch." Malik said nothing. "My son," Morris continued, "he's 15, black, from my wife's first marriage. He got stopped last week walking to the library. They made him sit on the sidewalk. Called it a routine check." Malik's voice was low. "And now you're realizing the system doesn't care about the badge when the skin is dark." Morris nodded slowly. "I've been part of the problem." "Yes," Malik said flatly. "I want to do better. Help me." Malik narrowed his eyes. "Then start by reforming your department. Stop criminalizing tone. Stop confusing fear with guilt. Train your officers to see people instead of suspects." "I will." Malik picked up a notepad. "Good. Come to the community roundtable next week. Bring your son. Sit in the back and listen." Done. The roundtable that week was held in the community center gymnasium. Folding chairs, bad acoustics, too many opinions, and not enough trust. Malik stood at the center. No microphone, just voice. He didn't lecture, he asked, "What does justice feel like to you?" One by one, people stood. A grandmother who lost her grandson to police brutality. A high school teacher tired of watching her students get suspended for defending themselves. A delivery driver fined for looking suspicious in a rich neighborhood. Then, from the back, a teenage voice. "Justice feels like not having to look over my shoulder every day." The crowd turned. It was Captain Morris's son. His hands were trembling, but his words were steel. "My dad's a cop, and I'm still afraid." The silence that followed was deafening. Then applause. Malik stepped forward and gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "That," he said, "is the truth we build from." A week later, the mayor's office called. "We'd like you to speak at the city's annual Justice Reform Summit." Malik paused. "You're sure you dialed the right number?" The aide chuckled nervously. "Yes, sir. You've become hard to ignore." At the summit, the room was full of suits and sound bites. But when Malik walked on stage in a simple gray blazer, no tie, dreadlocks tied back, the room changed. He didn't open with statistics. He opened with a story. "A judge once told me to speak proper English," he began. "I pulled out my law degree instead." The audience laughed. "But that story isn't about me. It's about the fact that I had to prove I belonged before I even opened my mouth. It's about how we measure worth and whose voice we value." He told them about Jamal, about Dolores, about Nia. He ended with this. If we keep demanding that people change how they speak just to be heard, maybe it's not them who are broken. Maybe it's our ears." A standing ovation. But Malik didn't linger. He left before the champagne. Back in the courtroom, the next battle awaited. This time, it was a public housing case. A woman named Karina had been served eviction papers after her son was arrested for a crime he didn't commit. "I didn't even know what was happening until the police came banging at my door," she sobbed. Malik reviewed the file. No warrant, no formal charge, just suspicion, just proximity. In court, the city's attorney tried to paint the son as a gang member. Malik stood up, face like stone. "Objection, Your Honor." "On what grounds?" the judge asked. "On the grounds that character assassination is not a legal strategy." The judge blinked, sustained. Malik turned to the jury. "We keep saying innocent until proven guilty, but too often we live by a different rule. black until proven white. The courtroom went silent. The case was dismissed. Karina's home was saved. That night, Malik was at home, a modest one-bedroom apartment with more books than furniture, when his phone buzzed. A FaceTime request from his mother. He answered. "Hey, Ma." Janice Carter grinned through the screen. "You know how proud I am of you, right?" He chuckled. "You tell me every week, because I need you to never forget it. This world tried to mute your voice since the day you were born, and still, here you are, unmuted." Malik's throat tightened. "Thanks, Ma." She leaned closer. "And don't forget to eat something that ain't instant noodles." "I'll think about it." They both laughed. But not every day was triumphant. One morning, Malik walked into court to find graffiti on the walls outside. He talked ghetto. "Yale made a mistake. Go back to Africa." Malik stared for a long time, then took out a Sharpie from his bag. Right under the graffiti, he wrote, "Still here, still rising," and walked inside. Spring arrived in the city with the kind of warmth that made even the courthouse feel less cold. But Malik knew the next case would be the hardest of his career. It involved a young black man named Corey Talbot, 19 years old, falsely accused of assaulting an off-duty police officer during a protest. There was no footage, no eyewitnesses, only the officer's statement and Corey's black eye. Corey had been marching peacefully when the officer, out of uniform, grabbed him from behind and slammed him to the pavement. Corey flailed, instinctively, naturally. The officer later claimed Corey struck him intentionally, and now the boy faced felony charges. Malik met Corey in the holding cell. "You okay?" he asked. Corey shook his head. "They said I might go away for 10 years. Malik sat down beside him. "Not on my watch, but it's my word against his." "Then I'll make your word matter more." The case was assigned to Judge Lawrence Whitaker, an old-school, hard-nosed white man with a reputation for cracking down on young black men. Malik knew this wouldn't be a fair fight, but he didn't back down. He never did. In court, the prosecutor painted Corey as aggressive, non-compliant, and a threat. Malik stood slowly. "With all due respect," he said, "those words are not evidence. They are projections, and they are dangerous." The prosecutor scoffed. "Mr. Carter, are you suggesting the officer lied?" "I'm saying trauma distorts memory, and fear distorts truth, and sometimes power distorts both." He turned to Judge Whitaker. "I request dismissal based on lack of evidence and the constitutional right not to be prosecuted for self-defense." The judge frowned. Motion denied. Malik expected it. He adjusted his tie and leaned in. "Then I asked to call my next witness, Dr. Alma Reyes, an expert in trauma psychology." The judge raised an eyebrow. "This court does not require a lecture on psychology." Malik smiled calmly. "Then perhaps it requires perspective." Dr. Reyes testified about flight or fight responses, how trauma shapes instinct, how black youth in America learn fear the way others learn math. By the time she finished, the courtroom had changed. Malik stood again. "We're not just fighting for Corey," he said. "We're fighting for every black teenager who's been taught that defending themselves is a punishable offense." He paused. "And while some demand we speak proper English, others demand we stay silent entirely." Whitaker narrowed his eyes. Malik met his gaze. "You asked me once, Judge," he continued, voice steady, "if I was accusing someone in uniform of lying. Let me ask you, are you accusing this young man of surviving?" Silence. Powerful. Thick. Even the bailiff looked down. The jury deliberated 6 hours. Then came the verdict, not guilty. Corey broke into sobs. His mother cried so hard she could barely stand. Malik hugged them both. The next morning, Malik returned to the same courtroom. But something was different. Judge Whitaker waited in his chambers. He motioned for Malik to sit. "I owe you no apology," the judge began coldly. "But I do owe this city better rulings." Malik tilted his head. "Interesting start." Whitaker sighed. "I've never met someone like you. You speak with fire, and you force us to see what we don't want to." Malik said nothing. "I'm stepping down," Whitaker continued. "Early retirement. I won't pretend it's because of you, but it's not because of you either. Malik's eyes narrowed. So what do you want from me? Forgiveness? No, the judge whispered. Just a chance to leave less damage behind. Word spread fast. A month later, Malik was invited to teach a guest seminar at Yale Law. He stood at the front of a lecture hall where he'd once been ignored. Students raised their hands eagerly. One girl asked, "How do you stay calm when people try to silence you?" Malik smiled. Because my voice doesn't come from me. It comes from every person who's ever been told to sit down, shut up, or speak properly. Another asked, "What do you do when the system is too heavy to move?" He looked around the room. "Then you change the people carrying it." By summer, Malik had started a legal clinic in the South Side, free services, community education, youth mentorship. Every wall was painted with murals of black leaders, including a new one, Malik himself. But he hated the idea of being a symbol. One afternoon, as he locked up, a little boy ran up to him. "Mr. Carter." Malik turned. It was Trayvon, the boy who'd written him the letter months ago. "I got into the summer debate program," Trayvon beamed, "and I used your story for my essay." Malik kneeled down. "That's amazing, Trey. I'm proud of you." The boy pulled out a tiny notepad. "Will you sign this?" Malik chuckled, took the pen, and wrote, "Your voice is already powerful. Just keep using it, MC." 1 year to the day after Judge Bexley told him to speak proper English, Malik returned to that same courtroom, this time as the keynote speaker at a judicial diversity training. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. He stood at the podium, looked into the eyes of dozens of judges, and began, "Last year, I stood here as a stranger in your courtroom. Today, I stand here as a reminder that power is not in titles, it's in truth." He scanned the room. If you want to be better judges, start by judging less, listen more, assume less, and never again tell someone that their voice isn't worthy of this space. He paused. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing in this courtroom isn't the defendant, it's the silence. Applause erupted, and in the front row, Judge Bexley stood first.